my project today is breaking apart this Aloe aristata, or Lace Aloe is its common name. It has these fun little white tips. They're really thin. This one has a little bit more browning than normal, but that's also very common for it to happen. You can see there's some red leaves in here. This has been pretty severely underwatered. If you take a look at the size of the plant and the number of plants compared to the pot, you can start to understand why it might be having a hard time getting enough water, especially because this is really root bound. I can't even get it out of the pot actually. So this is a little 2.5-inch square pot that I got this giant plant in. I love finding deals like this. This whole thing was $4. It's definitely one that the grower could eventually separate out like I'm going to right now. And it's probably at least 10 plants in there, if not more, that would all fit in that pot, or this one in the middle would fit in a much bigger pot. Let's divide it up and see how many are in there and check out the roots too. The soil is really hard. I can show it to you in the Succulent Tracker app in a minute, but I just checked and I think it was last watered 11 days ago. When I watered this, I bottom watered it because there was no way I was gonna get water in through these leaves and ensure that all of the soil was soaked all the way through. Even still, I feel like it just didn't get enough water to really absorb it up into all of these plants. This is so root bound. I can barely even soften it as I try and kind of smash it here. So what I think I'm going to do is start pulling babies off the side and just see if that helps get things loosened up a little bit. So let's start with this one. This one on its own, and many of these will be the same, is big enough it could be a 2-inch plant all by itself. All right, let's set this down. Break these apart. I do want to keep roots on these if I can. Because it's so underwatered, it will transplant a lot better if it has some roots. The roots look like they're probably healthy. They don't look amazing, but they don't look terrible either. So I do think that having roots is going to help improve the transplant into some new soil. You can see that this is curving to one side. Part of that is from being squished into the pot, and part of it is from just being on the side of the plant and not being able to get quite enough light, so it just kind of grows outward. Once I get this potted up, it will actually straighten up over time as it gets more light and more water, and it will look perfectly normal instead of kind of lopsided and flat right now. This other one that I pulled off is actually even worse. It's a lot more bent. But again, it will straighten up over time. It won't be instantly, but it shouldn't take super long either. Typically just giving them plenty of overhead light and enough water, they'll start to stand right back up again. That one doesn't have a ton of roots, but they are pretty thick and they seem healthy overall. You can't even tell that I took anything off of there. There are still so many plants left. I love it. You can hear this breaking, which is normal and to be expected. Sometimes when you pull plants off, they are actually attached to the mother plant, and so you're kind of breaking it off of the stem of the mother plant. In this case, though, I think it's just roots that are breaking because I don't see any strong attachment here where this baby would have been attached to the mother plant. We do have a little baby growing off of it, though. All right, I'm trying to pull these out and get as much root as I can and break as little as possible. Sometimes when I'm repotting succulents, I'm aggressive with pulling off roots because it's just easier if you're not worried about the roots. But like I said, with this one, I feel like it'll transplant better if it has some roots. I kind of want to break this off just because this root is a little long and unwieldy for this plant, but you can see it has a couple babies growing on it. I'm going to go ahead and leave this, and when I pot it, I'll actually just put the root in like this. So if you're keeping track with me, we're up to 4 that I've pulled off so far. And here comes number 5, actually 5 and 6. There is a much smaller plant attached to this one. One of the things that crossed my mind as I began taking this apart is whether or not I wanted to pull all of the babies off and separate from all the other plants. However, in this case, there's actually 2 babies growing on this one. I'm going to leave these together they'll grow much faster together, and then I can just separate these out once they're a little bit bigger. For counting purposes, I'm only going to count that one as one. I think I'm mostly going by how many pots I'm going to put these into. So here is number 6. Right here, this is extremely hard. I think it's just a bunch of clumped up soil in here. There's not even that many roots. One of the problems that you run into when plants are root bound, and succulents don't mind it. Some people say that succulents like to be root bound. I don't know that I'd quite go that far, but they will grow root bound, as you can see from this plant. One of the issues, though, that you run into is eventually water gets stuck in here and doesn't dry out, or the opposite can happen depending on how you water, and no water will get in here because it's so compact it just repels the water. This one also has several little babies on it, so there's, ooh, I really want to keep these attached, but I also want to get off this dead leaf. I am going to leave these together because I think, again, they'll just grow better that way. And still trying to loosen up the roots here. And as I do so, I am breaking off a lot of root, which is fine. These will keep growing anyway. We are getting down now to the last few plants. You can actually see that I've taken stuff off, but we're still having a lot of big plants here. Okay, so this is the one main mother plant. And as I'm working with this, I'm realizing it's not as underwatered as it seems. However, these are still really pliable leaves. This should be really plump and firm, but the amount that it is watered is encouraging to me. I think these will do a lot better once they're potted on their own and they can actually absorb water more easily. I think they will perk up really quickly. And then this last little section I have, let's see. So there's the main plant here. I've got a baby here. Got 1, 2, maybe 3 more babies. 2? So 1, 2, 3, I think total. And I'm gonna try and just loosen this up. The problem with planting this with this really tight root ball into any other type of soil, but also especially a gritty mix, is it's just going to make it difficult for water to get into these sections. So the more you can loosen up with this, the better. You want to at least be able to see the roots and not just a clump of soil. So this actually cleaned up pretty well. I looked over at the trash and realized there's a little baby in there, so can't let that one go. Of course, we're going to save it and plant it up with some of these others. So total, I have 8 groups of plants, or in this case, this one's just individual. But this plant on its own would easily fit into a 4 or 5 inch pot. So this plant could be at least $10 to $15 by itself. And if we just pretend that each of these would go into a 2.5 inch pot at $4 a piece, that's $28. We'll call this 10. So $38 worth of plants for $4. That's why I love going to local nurseries, looking for plants that are in good shape, but also overflowing their pots, because you can get a really great deal. I don't actually have very many large pots, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this one inside. This is probably a 4 or 5 inch grower pot, and it may get a new home eventually, but this will be a good size for it for now. The rest of these will probably go into 2 or 3 inch pots, just depending on how big they are. These bigger ones will go into 3 inches, smaller ones into 2 inch pots. All right, so this is filled up most of the way just because this doesn't have a super deep root system, but I do want to keep it mostly above the rim of the pot still. So go ahead and fill in around the sides. And there is our first potted lace aloe. The mother plant finally gets to be all on her own. And we'll just keep working through them, putting these, I think most of them will end up going into a 3 inch pot because, as you can see, they're filling it pretty easily. This looks super goofy, especially from the top, I feel like, or, well, this side. But it really will perk up in probably just a couple weeks and look more like a normal plant. This past week has been pretty challenging. Replanting these succulents has been on my to-do list for a while, and while I wasn't super concerned about it, it was something that was weighing on my mind. Something that I have found though is if I spend some time repotting my succulents and working with plants, even if there's maybe better things to do with my time, I have found this usually helps me reset and just feel a little bit more calm and ready to go. I know a lot of people talk about the healing benefits of working with plants. I do think there's absolutely truth to that. Sometimes I feel like my plants cause more stress than they help me relieve, but there are definitely times like tonight where these are helping me feel a lot more relaxed. Something that has actually helped make gardening or succulent care a little bit easier is having a dedicated space where I can come repot my succulents without having to make a big mess every time. That has not always been the case for me. I've not always had the space for that. But anytime I have, it makes my succulent projects get done a lot faster, or I'm just more inclined to spend time working on them. So even if it's just like a little cart that you can keep somewhere near your kitchen and you just work right on top of that cart, I would highly recommend trying to find a way to create a little potting space in your home. So I've kind of gone in reverse order, started with the largest and I'm going down to the smallest now. This is the last one that I'm going to put in a 3-inch pot. They just look so goofy leaned over like this. The other thing though that happens with this is you'll notice these leaves are much longer than the leaves on this side. So they are a little bit unbalanced in that way. That won't necessarily even out, but it will look more normal over time as the new growth kind of takes front and center. These last two I'm going to put into 2-inch pots. And it's almost time to restock my soil. This one is a pretty good example of that uneven growth. You can see it even looks like there's more leaves on this upper side than there are on the bottom side. It does have a little baby right here too, which kind of adds to the unbalance of it, but eventually it'll all get worked out. This is the final one, and it's the one that has that kind of funky root and also these two babies growing really low on the stem. I am going to bury these, but they should pop up pretty quickly, especially once this starts getting more water. It's always fascinating to me too to see how long projects take. I had put this one off because I felt like it was going to take a long time to repot because there were so many babies on it. But in the end, it really only took me about 20 minutes to get all that done. And I was talking to you while I worked, which means I usually go a little bit slower. I am really excited to see how these straighten up and look over the next few weeks. It's best not to water succulents right after you repot them. However, if you are switching them from a more organic soil mix to a gritty mix, I recommend watering every 3 to 4 days initially, especially if they're underwatered like this. It just helps them acclimate to that gritty soil and have a little boost before they go to the true soak and dry method for watering. Hopefully this encourages you to spend a little bit of time in your garden today or the next day and help yourself relax a little bit with your plants.